The courthouse rose from the middle of the city, like something carved out of judgment itself. Tall grey pillars stood rigid against the morning sky. Wide steps stretched forward like a test anyone entering had to pass. And the heavy glass doors reflected everything except mercy. Boys moved quickly, files tucked under their arms. Police officers stood near the entrance, hands resting close to their belts. Ordinary people climbed the steps slowly, carrying worry, fear, or hope on their faces. On a stone bench near the side of the steps sat a man almost no one truly saw. He wore a dark hoodie, slightly faded jeans, and old sneakers whose white had long turned grey. A disposable coffee cup sat near his foot. His posture was relaxed, his back straight, his expression calm and unreadable. He wasn't asking for money. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't talking to anyone. His name was Daniel Brooks. To most people passing by, he looked like someone who didn't belong. A woman walking past tightened her grip on her purse. A man in a suit glanced at Daniel and immediately looked away. Two courthouse clerks whispered as they descended the steps, their eyes flicking toward him and then away again. Daniel noticed all of it. He always did. He checked his watch. 8:47 a.m., plenty of time. A security guard standing near the main doors had been watching him for several minutes. The guard was tall, broad, and stiff in the way people get when authority is the only thing holding them upright. He leaned toward another guard and nodded in Daniel's direction. "He's been sitting there too long," he muttered. The other guard shrugged. So people like that don't hang around courthouses for no reason." The second guard looked again. "He's not doing anything." "That's what bothers me," the first replied. He straightened his jacket and walked toward Dano, boots echoing against the stone. "Hey," he said sharply. "You." Dano looked up, polite, calm. "Yes, what are you doing here?" "Waiting," Daniel replied. "For who?" the guard demanded. "For my turn," Daniel said. The guard frowned. "Your turn for what?" Daniel smiled faintly. "For work." That answer annoyed him. "This isn't a place to hang around," the guard snapped. "You need to move." "I'm allowed to sit here," Daniel said evenly. "It's a public courthouse." The guard crossed his arms. "Not when you're making people uncomfortable." Daniel looked around. "I haven't spoken to anyone." "That's not the point," the guard said. "You don't belong here." The words were quiet but sharp. A few people nearby slowed down. Someone raised a phone slightly. Tension began to spread, thin and electric. "I have business inside," Daniel said. The guard laughed. "You, inside?" "Yeah, right. If there's a problem," Daniel continued calmly, "we can speak to your supervisor." That suggestion lit a fuse. "Stand up," the guard ordered. Daniel stood, slow and deliberate. "Turn around." "For what reason?" Daniel asked. "Because I told you to?" Daniel sighed softly. "I'm not resisting anything, but I'd like to understand why." The guard stepped closer. "You're being suspicious." "In what way?" "You're loitering." "I'm waiting." "You're refusing to leave." "I haven't been asked legally." The guard's face hardened. "Don't get smart with me." Another officer approached, sensing trouble. "What's going on?" "This guy's causing an issue," the guard said. "Won't leave." Daniel turned to the new officer. "I'm waiting to enter the courthouse. I've broken no rule." The officer studied Daniel for a moment. "He's not blocking access." "That doesn't matter," the guard snapped. "People like him make others nervous." The phrase landed heavily. Daniel felt something familiar settle in his chest. Not anger, not fear, Just the tired weight of experience. I'm going to ask you one last time, the guard said loudly. Leave now or I'll call the police. Several heads turned fully now. A woman whispered, "This again." Daniel nodded slowly. "If that's what you feel you need to do," he said, "go ahead." The guard smirked and grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, send officers to the front. Possible vagrant refusing to leave courthouse grounds." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. Not in defeat, but in recognition of how predictable this moment was. Within minutes, 2 police officers arrived. They listened as the guard spoke first, his words carefully chosen to paint Daniel as a problem. "He won't explain why he's here," the guard said. "Refuses to comply. Could be a security risk." One officer turned to Daniel. "Sir, why are you here?" Daniel met his eyes calmly. "I'm scheduled to go inside shortly for official business." "What kind of business?" the officer asked. "Judicial," Daniel replied. The guard laughed openly. "Hear that?" The officer raised an eyebrow. "Sir, do you have any ID or paperwork?" "Not on me," Daniel said. "It's already on file." The second officer sighed. "Without proof, we're going to have to ask you to leave." Daniel nodded. "If you remove me," he said calmly, "you will regret it." The guard's smile widened. "Is that a threat?" "No," Daniel replied. "It's a fact." The officers exchanged a glance. "All right," one said. "Hands behind your back." Daniel complied without resistance. At that moment, the glass doors swung open. A woman in a tailored navy suit stepped out, scanning the steps anxiously. Her eyes locked onto Daniel and widened. "Judge Brooks," she said loudly. Everything stopped. The officers froze. The guard's face drained of color. Daniel looked at her and smiled. "Good morning, Ms. Alvarez." She rushed forward. "We've been waiting for you. Court is about to begin." Silence fell like a dropped gavel. Judge, one officer whispered. "Years," Ms. Alvarez said sharply. "Federal Judge Daniel Brooks." The guard stumbled back. "That's not, I didn't know." Daniel turned to him calmly. "You called the police on me." The guard's mouth opened and closed. "I was just—" "You judged me," Daniel said softly, "without knowing my name." The officers immediately stepped back, uncuffing him. "Judge, we sincerely apologize." Daniel nodded once. "I'm sure you do." He turned toward the courthouse doors. Inside, lawyers and clerks stood as he entered, murmurs rippling through the hallway. Daniel changed into his robe and stepped into the courtroom. "Everyone rise," the clerk announced. These same man who had been treated as a threat moments ago now sat above them all, calm, composed, undeniable. Outside, the guard stood frozen, realization crushing him. Inside, Daniel spoke, his voice steady. "Court is now in session." And in that moment, justice wasn't just a word carved into stone. It was a lesson learned too late by those who thought appearance was truth. Daniel Brooks sat on the bench, the weight of the courtroom settling around him like a familiar coat. The room had fallen into the disciplined silence that always followed his entrance. Lawyers adjusted their papers. Defendants avoided his eyes. The gallery leaned forward slightly, sensing that something important was unfolding, even if they didn't yet understand why. Only minutes earlier, he had been a problem. Now, he was authority. Daniel rested his hands lightly on the desk, feeling the smooth, worn wood beneath his fingertips. From this angle, the world looked different. Not higher, just clearer. He could see nerves in the way a young attorney's pen trembled. 2. He could see fear in the hunched shoulders of a defendant who had already decided he was guilty before a word had been spoken. He could see confidence, false and brittle. in lawyers who believed power was something you wore, not something you earned. First case, the clerk announced. As the proceedings began, Daniel's voice remained steady, professional, precise. No trace of the morning incident surfaced in his tone. He listened. He ruled. Justice moved forward, as it always did, slowly, carefully, imperfectly. But outside the courtroom, time had stopped. Security guard Thomas Reed stood near the glass doors, staring at his reflection. For the first time in years, he didn't recognize the man looking back at him. His face was pale, his jaw tight, his eyes unfocused. Around him, the courthouse continued its rhythm, people walking, doors opening, phones ringing, but for Thomas, everything felt muted, like sound underwater. He replayed the moment again and again. The hoodie, the shoes, the calm voice, and his own words. People, like you, make others nervous. The phrase burned now. It felt poisonous, obvious in a way it never had before. Thomas had said it hundreds of times in different forms. He had never questioned it. It had always felt justified, even responsible. Now it felt like evidence. Another officer approached him cautiously. "You okay, Reed?" Thomas swallowed. "I almost had a federal judge in cuffs." The officer grimaced. "I heard. I didn't know," Thomas said quickly, as if saying it enough times might change something. The officer shrugged. "Doesn't matter. You shouldn't have treated him like that either way." Thomas looked up sharply. "So what? Now you're judging me." The officer sighed. "No," saying, "this place sees everything. Eventually." Thomas turned back to the glass. Inside, he could see the courtroom doors, closed now. Somewhere beyond them, Daniel Brooks was presiding over lives, futures, consequences. And Thomas Reed was standing outside, stripped of certainty. Inside the courtroom, Daniel concluded the first case and moved on to the second. As the morning passed, something subtle shifted in the air. Word traveled quickly in buildings like this. Clerks whispered. Lawyers murmured in hallways. The story began forming not just about a judge, but about what had happened on the steps. By mid-morning, everyone knew. A judge had been mistaken for a vagrant. Security had called the police. Handcuffs had almost clicked shut. Some told it with embarrassment, others with disbelief, a few with uncomfortable laughter. Daniel was aware of it all. He had lived long enough to recognize the ripple effect of moments like this. They never stayed small. During a short recess, his clerk approached quietly. "Judge, would you like me to file a report regarding the incident?" Daniel looked up at her. Why? Well, protocol. He considered this. No? Not yet. She hesitated. "Are you sure?" "Yes," he said. "Throw. But I do want the security supervisor to meet me after court." The clerk nodded and stepped away. Daniel leaned back slightly in his chair. His reflection stared back at him from the dark glass of the monitor. Same face, same eyes, different treatment shared. That difference had always been the point. Years ago, before the bench, before the robe, before the title, Daniel Brooks had learned how quickly a person could disappear in plain sight. Law school hadn't been the hardest part. Clerkships hadn't been the hardest part. The hardest part had been existing in spaces that pretended neutrality while practicing assumption. This morning had simply stripped the disguise away. Court recessed just before lunch. As Daniel exited the courtroom, conversations hushed. People stepped aside instinctively now. Respect replaced suspicion with remarkable speed. Outside, Thomas Reed was called into his supervisor's office. The supervisor didn't yell. That was worse. You made a judgment, the supervisor said calmly, hands folded on the desk. And it wasn't based on behavior. It was based on appearance. Thomas stared at the floor. I was trying to keep the place safe. From what? The supervisor asked. Thomas didn't answer. The supervisor sighed. You're suspended pending review. The words hit harder than Thomas expected. Suspended? He repeated. Yes. And before you asked, no, the judge didn't demand this. This came from us. Thomas looked up, shocked. He didn't complain. No, the supervisor said. Which should bother you more, not less. Us outside the courthouse, Daniel stepped into the daylight. The city looked the same. Traffic moved. People argued into phones. A man sold pretzels on the corner. Daniel paused at the top of the steps. For a moment, he stood exactly where he had been sitting earlier that morning. Same place. Same air. Different world. A young man approached hesitantly. Excuse me, Judge Brooks. Yes, I just wanted to say, I saw what happened. I didn't say anything then. I should have. Daniel studied him. The man looked nervous, sincere. Why didn't you? Daniel asked gently. The man swallowed. Because it was easier not to. Daniel nodded. That's usually the answer. The man nodded back, ashamed but thoughtful, and walked away. Daniel descended the steps and disappeared into the city. By the next week, the story had reached places Daniel never expected. Legal circles discussed it in hushed tones. Law schools mentioned it in ethics classes. Security firms quietly updated training manuals. Thomas Reed attended mandatory bias training for the first time in his career. He listened, uncomfortable, defensive at first, then quiet. One slide stayed with him. Assumption is action. He thought of the bench. The hoodie. The cuffs that never closed. Inside a different courtroom, weeks later, Daniel presided over another case involving unlawful detention. As arguments unfolded, his gaze remained steady, but something deeper anchored his words. The law, he said, does not require us to understand one another. It requires us to treat one another justly. No one in the room missed the weight behind it. Outside, life continued, as it always does, even imperfect, learning slowly. But somewhere on the courthouse steps, an invisible line had shifted. Oh, and every person who passed through those doors after that morning walked through a space that had, however slightly, changed. Because once justice is seen standing quietly in old shoes and a faded hoodie, it becomes much harder to pretend you don't recognize it the next time it appears.